so. Yeah, he'll shoot right into the 72, maybe 82. The strike short.
All right. Let's start with a really loud welcome to Tom and John for the Tom Pipines Show. So you guys could.
Wow. So, Mike, are we supposed to start now?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody at Enders for coming by. Family, friends, it means a lot to me, to us, and for other customers who thought they'd have a peaceful meal, we apologize. But this is the Tom Pipines Show with John Dodds, ladies and gentlemen. You can find us at tompipins.com or the Tom Pipines Show with John Dodds. We've got a podcast going, and we hope to keep it going for a long time. And we're so grateful to be here at Enders in Heartland. The owner, Pat Enders, his staff. How about a great round of applause for them? Oh. The food and beverages are outstanding.
Absolutely.
I call this guy the star of the show, John Dodds. He is the doctor of Green Bay Packers action. Right, John?
Well, I attended Marquette. My major was Green Bay Packer history, and my minor was the playoffs and Packer trivia. So I had a double minor.
Yeah. But his wife, Sheila, will tell you that he does have a life. We're going to talk on Championship Sunday about Packers playoff losses. So we apologize if it's difficult to stomach, but we have to talk about it. Obviously, the Pack won the Super Bowl 1 and 2. Lombardi goes. Phil Bankston comes in, and they do get a whiff of the playoffs. In 1972, a loss to the Washington Redskins, 16-3.
16-3. Dan Devine came in, had a bad year his first year. Then in his second year, he caught fire with a running game with John Brockington and MacArthur Lane and got to the playoffs. Bart Starr was the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach. And Bart Starr is probably the nicest guy ever. Pip's a good guy, and I'm a good guy. But Pip is Ray Nitschke, and I'm Dick Butkus compared to Bart Starr. Bart Starr is absolutely the nicest guy. And anyway, he was the offensive coordinator, called all the plays for Scott Hunter and Jerry Tagge until they got to the playoffs. And at that point, Dan Devine thought that Bart Starr was getting too much credit, so Dan Devine decided to call the plays instead of Bart Starr and basically put him in the background. And during the game, the Packers struggled, and George Allen of the Washington Redskins did something I've never seen before or since. He took a safety out and put an extra defensive lineman in, and they had 5 defensive linemen during the game to stop the Packer running game. And Devine didn't know what to do to overcome that, and Bart Starr was there, basically powerless. So Bart Starr quit after that loss and spent the next 2 years trying to get Dan Devine fired and become Packer head coach, which is so different than this guy you think, but Dan Devine drove him to that. So the Packers lost 16-3 in that game.
Only John Dodds would know all these statistics from the 1972 playoff game. Chester Marcole, with the only points of the game, a field goal. So now you move on to 1982, the strike-shortened season, and a big win over the then St. Louis Cardinals, John.
Yeah, that was in Lambeau. That was the first playoff game since the Ice Bowl. And Len Dickey and John Jefferson, Paul Kaufman, and James Lofton did really well. They got up big early, and St. Louis wasn't that good of a team. That was before they moved to the Cardinals, before they moved to Phoenix. And so the Packers won that game pretty easily. I want to say it was 45-28 or something to that regard. So then the next game they ended up in Dallas. I think that's what you have there.
You're 100% right, absolutely, and that starts the whole losses to the Cowboys in postseason. It seemed every year that was going to happen. 89, the cardiac pack, they almost made the postseason, but really you have to get into the 90s when you got Ron Wolf, you have Mike Holmgren, and you have a fella named Brett Lorenzo Favre. But every year it seemed, do you remember that 1993? Maybe some of you do. Packers in Detroit, they were behind, game about to end, Favre back to pass, a bomb to Sterling Sharp, beating the gun, and the Packers move on in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy, and what I did in that was I calculated that Brett Favre was scrambling to his left, and he quickly turned and fired a rocket rope to Sterling Sharp, who was wide open down on the other side. And I figured, using my algebra and other background that I have, it was a 72-yard pass on the line that Favre made within a split second. And I remember Dick Vermeil saying, who was doing the game for ABC, he was saying that when Sterling Sharp went out, the defensive back was following him. But normally when a quarterback goes the other way, the cornerbacks are taught to face that way and kind of face, and something will happen in front of you, never knowing that Favre could have a rocket arm where he could take it and throw it 75,
Only
72
he could have
yards on
made
a
that
line.
throw, huh?
So it was an unbelievable play for the win, and that was the Packers had been 500 the year before. They were 500 this time, or 9-7. I'm sorry, the year before, and 9-7 this year. That year, and that was the first big win. So that was a big advancement for Ron Wolf and the team.
And then they have to go to Big D, Texas Stadium at the time, and they lose to Jimmy Johnson, Troy Aikman, and company. And it was Dallas every year. It reminds me of when the Bucks were really good in the Don Nelson era. Every year it was the Boston Celtics or Philadelphia 76ers, keeping them out of the championship run. And it was that way for the Pack, but they were getting closer. In 95, they beat the Falcons 37-20, and then they go to San Francisco and shock the 49ers with Steve Young by a score of 27-17. Out of the box, you remember Craig Newsome, pick six.
Right. Wayne Simmons hit a running back, forced a fumble. Craig Newsome picked him up, ran it in. That San Francisco game was the signature game of the Ron Wolf era. It just said, our rebuild is over. Here are the Green Bay Packers, and they basically kicked San Francisco all over the field that day. They were up, I think, 27-0 or something.
Yeah.
Just dominated them. And it seemed like on offense, Mike Holmgren had a wide open tight end, either Keith Jackson or Mark Chmura on every play. So they literally dominated, and it was over. It was Reggie White. They had a great defense. I mean, the whole thing was there, and they were much better than the year before. But then they had to go to Dallas again.
Again, they never
Right.
got to play him at Lambeau, did they? Until I think the Super Bowl season.
Right.
And they fight. What sticks out to me, I happen to be there. I remember the issue. The Packers not only lost the game, they almost lost an assistant coach. He almost died on the sideline.
Yeah, Gil
Haskell. Yeah.
Gil Haskell was the wide receiver coach, and a play, and people, you can't realize how fast the NFL is, because I've been on a sideline. And I remember watching Brian Noble go from the line of scrimmage and drop back 40 yards in a second. These people come on you so quickly. I decided that it was safer up in the press box. So I've never been on the field probably since the mid 90s. But Gil Haskell got caught up, and one of the things, if you're ever hit or fall on the ice, when you're falling backwards, you got to take your head and put your chin near your chest to keep your head up, and fall back so the back of your head doesn't hit. And Gil Haskell
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you. Safety tip. Winter safety tip. And Gil Haskell didn't do that, and the back of his head hit very hard. And he was in the hospital, I think, for 10 days down in Dallas. And they were worried about blood clots. They were worried about all sorts of things. But then he came back, and I think after about 6 months, he was fine.
Brett Favre said he'll never forget the scene where Gil's eyes were rolling in his head, a close friend of Mike Holmgren. So it was a very difficult time just to get back at it. But thankfully, he did make a full recovery. All right, so you're getting closer now, but Favre is still getting the reputation for not being able to win the big one. We go to 98 at the 49ers, 30-20. So what I remember about that game,
The Terrell Owens game.
absolutely.
Right.
Now,
Right.
we had been covering the Rose Bowl. I was supposed to go home, but they had weather issues, so they said, why don't you take a car to San Francisco? I was in the end zone when that pass was thrown to Terrell Owens, the winning touchdown. But what happened with Jerry Rice that really led to a rules change? The Packers could have won that game.
Yeah, there was a play. The Packers went down the field and took the lead late in the game, under 2 minutes, and Steve Young was driving San Francisco back. He threw a pass at midfield to Jerry Rice, who was stripped as he was going down, and the Packers recovered it to win the game. But unfortunately, there was no replay back then, and the ref blew the whistle, so they gave it back to San Francisco. And then about 2 plays later, Young threw a pass down the line, and a Packer was about to intercept it. I think it was Craig Newsome, and a wide receiver for San Francisco grabbed his face mask, just took it and threw him down. Now, nowadays, that would have been a 15-yard penalty or targeting or something. Threw him down, so he dropped it. And I remember I was at this party, and I thought, they called incomplete, no penalty. I said, this is bad. So I remember standing up on this final play. I thought, something bad is going to happen here. And Young went back to pass, and he tripped, and he went down. And Darren Sharper in the secondary lost track of him in the huddle or in the pocket. And then they just slightly moved, and then that was enough to create space that Young threw it to Terrell Owens, who might be one of the biggest jerks in sports. Great talent, but Hall of Fame talent, but just really, he didn't even show up at the Canton to be inducted this summer. So he catches it, and what was sad about that one is
Last game for Reggie White.
it was
as a Packer.
It was
right?
the end of an era for Reggie White.
Right, two Super Bowls in a row, right? Everybody remembers winning 31, but then 32, they had Denver on the ropes. They got off to a great start, lost it, and I think we can say this in a podcast. Ron Wolf, the GM, said, we're just a fart in the wind.
Yeah.
We're a fart in the wind instead of winning 2 in a row.
Right. I remember leaving San Diego, listening to that, thinking that's great that the GM realizes that they really had an opportunity here. That was
greatness.
That was a devastating Super Bowl loss back because it was right there. But what the Packers didn't realize, and I didn't realize because I was pretty cocky before that game. I thought the Packers were going to win big, and that was going to be 2 straight Super Bowls. But I worked over the years. I've worked with the Oakland Raiders, and one of the Raiders people.
This guy was a scout for the Oakland Raiders. You were part of you gave Al Davis, the late legendary Al Davis,
Rookie.
a little input on a trade involving the Packers and Marcus Anderson, right? Now, I don't want to get you
did.
too far off the mark. We've got to move on, but
Sure.
just give us a line or two.
Sure. No, I would work with the Raiders on game day. Al Davis, who I had a lot of respect for, he was kind of like the mad scientist, and he would have what's called spies in various NFL cities who would be at these games, and he would evaluate rookies and evaluate it and keep track of injuries. So after the game, I would call in to Oakland and give him an evaluation of how the rookies are doing, and he would have dinner, and he'd have 14 reports from 14 cities, and he would look at these while he's eating dinner so he could check what his scouts said the April before, how good these people were going to be versus how good they really were. So he was always thinking, trying to get better. But one of those personnel people told me, you don't realize how good Denver is. And when you think back to the Denver team versus the Packer team, everybody thought the Packers were going to win, but the only Hall of Famers that the Packers had in the starting lineup, Favre, Reggie White, maybe Leroy Butler coming up, in the next couple of years. For Denver, there was Elway, there was Terrell Davis, the running back.
Who just burned him. He gassed him, Gilbert Brown and company, and the Heat, remember, in San Diego, just
Absolutely killed him.
gassed.
Shannon Sharp, the tight end. Gary Zimmerman, the outside linebacker, or the offensive tackle, I'm sorry. They just had a really good team, and they were underestimated. And never underestimate your opponent. I think the Packers did, and it was unfortunate.
I remember the night before the game, we did an interview with Reggie White, and he wouldn't say it on camera, but he said, I don't have a good feeling about this game. That sticks out to me, and sure enough, it didn't. By the way, we're the Tom Pippin Show, the Tom Pippin Show with John Dodge. You can find us at tompippins.com. We are coming to you from Enders and Heartland. We got to give it up for them. We appreciate it. Brentley and Mike are in the back doing the video work and the producing work. Let us move on and talk a little bit about. Now, how are you going to explain yourself out of this one? Brett Favre throws 6 interceptions against the Rams, and you're going to defend number 4?
I'll always defend number 4, but
Don't you have a poster that you kiss?
I do.
You kiss the Godfather's ring before you go to sleep?
I do. It's exactly.
We all love Brett Favre.
Brett Favre threw 6 interceptions against the St. Louis Rams
At the time, right.
at the time. And I looked at that game, and on my blog, I defended Brett Favre. And I said those 6 interceptions didn't really make a difference in the outcome. And I remember one of the people who looked at the blog said, John, do you kiss your Brett Favre poster every night before you go to bed? And I just said, no, I kiss my Donny Osmond poster first, and then I pivot over to my Brett Favre poster, and then I kiss that. But
But you're saying the picks didn't have a lot of impact on that particular game.
I don't think they did because the Packers, they were the greatest show on turf. They had a great quarterback in Kurt Warner. They had running back Marshall Falk. Torrey Holt was their top 5 wide receiver in the draft. Isaac Bruce. They had the number 1 pick at left tackle from Ohio State, Orlando Pace. So they had a tremendous offense. The only way the Packers could win that game is ball control, shorten the game, hand off to Amon Green, and keep going. Get up, hang on, and win. And shorten the game on the run. And unfortunately, the first play of the game, and I got to give a lot of credit to Lovie Smith. Lovie Smith was their defensive coordinator. And certain defensive coordinators understand the West Coast offense, and they know that there are certain indicators where a quarterback will look into the secondary and acknowledge here's where the safety is, here's where the linebacker is, and then all the wide receivers have to be on the same page to then adjust their routes compared to where the person is. Well, he disguised something, and Bill Schrader, the outside wide receiver, didn't see it. Favre did. It was a hot read. He was supposed to slant. Favre threw a slant. It was intercepted on the first play, in for a touchdown. So it was really the wide receiver's fault on that. But it was 7-0, and I knew the Packers were in huge trouble because you got to get up early, the only chance you have. So the Packers go down, make it 7-7. Then the Rams come down, make it 10-7. Then probably the key play of the game, and they handed it off to Amon Green. He ran 30 yards down the right sidelines. And I don't know if you remember Amon Green. He'd always keep the ball in his left hand. His right hand was injured, so he kept it in his left hand. Well, that was the trailing. The sideline would have protected it in his right, but he had it there, and a guy stripped him right on the sidelines. They got the ball, and it was 17-7. Essentially, the game was over. The Packer defense couldn't force a punt, and now you have the gunslinger, Brett Favre, saying, if we punt, we lose. So what I'm going to do is make plays, and if I have a tight window to fit it into, I'm going to fit it into that window. And
that was his mentality anyway, though, wasn't it?
It was his mentality, and I had John Dorsey on the next year, and he said after the draft, and they drafted Javon Walker in that draft.
The receiver.
So why did you draft Javon Walker? And Dorsey said, we look back at that St. Louis game, and we saw Brett Favre threw 6 interceptions, and we looked and we saw Antonio Freeman couldn't break Dre Bly's coverage. Bill Schrader couldn't get by Aeneas Williams. Bubba Franks couldn't outrun the St. Louis linebackers. So Brett Favre would go back without any separation, trying to make a play, throwing to non-open wide receivers. 3 interceptions returned for touchdowns after tipped balls. So I think it was kind of a fluke. But he said, we thought we have to give Brett Favre a weapon, somebody who can break press coverage and somebody who's big and fast. So they traded a number 1 and a number 2 pick up for Javon Walker.
Your recall. You see why they call him the doctor of the Packers, everybody? Holy shnikes. I'm going to have to shave here in a couple of minutes if we don't start to wrap this up. I think we have some sort of a time frame. So I do want to talk, John, about a couple of the games.
Is it curfew time? Or is
at some point.
11 o'clock?
4th and 26 in 03. Who will ever forget that game in Philadelphia?
Ouch, that one hurt. That one left a mark. About 10 dominoes had to fall a certain way. It was very much until...
You remember that game, 4th and 26, Packers fans? Yeah.
Yes.
Mike's still hurting, our producer over there. But set that up. Just, Packers are in good shape.
Packers are at Philadelphia. Philadelphia had a bye, and the Packers were on a roll. Even though they lost, I think they were 500. They were 3-3 after their first 6 games. They picked up Grady Jackson, and then Favre just went on this roll where he played as well as he ever did for about 5 or 6 straight games. Then his father died, and from that point on for about 4 games, he would throw a ball straight up in the air, and it would come right down into a Packer player for a touchdown. Then Minnesota loses on a last-second touchdown catch in Arizona for the Packers to even get to the playoffs. Packers offensive line, best probably in 30 years. They're running over people. They're on fire. They won their first playoff game. They're coming into Philadelphia. They're up 14-0. And here's where winning and losing is so close. They gave the ball to Amon Green. He runs it down to about the 3, and he had an asthma issue. So every now and then he couldn't catch his breath. So he goes out. They give the ball to Najee Davenport, or I believe that a couple of times. They get to the 1. They decide to go for it. And I remember Mike Holmgren always had a rule: always take the points. Never gamble. It's 14-0. 17-0 is killer. But instead, they went for it because 21-0 isn't as good. It doesn't seem to be as worth the risk to me. Well, they went for it. They put Amon Green back in the game, and they got stuffed at the 1. Philadelphia goes down and scores. It's 14-7 at halftime instead of 17-0. So it's just sweat that thing out. Packers eke out ahead. Final drive for the field goal. It's 4th and 26, and they go. And if you look at this play, I was doing Homer's talk show from the Potawatomi Casino. So this thing was there was a screen that was about as big as that wall, and I'm watching this thing, and I think the official marked it wrong. I don't think he got that first down on 4th and 26. And the reason why is the red line is out, and 26 yards is kind of like the dead space where the referee from the line of scrimmage and the referee who covers the defensive back, they're just not there. So they had this red line. The guy catches it.
Freddie Mitchell, was
Freddie
it?
Mitchell from UCLA catches it, and Sharper hits him right down. And the official coming from behind takes the ball and marks it 2 yards ahead. If you look, he came right down on the red line. But if you look in the score, it says 28-yard pass McNabb to Mitchell. And I'm looking at this, if Sherman knew, call timeout, see if he can get a replay, at least for the spot. But they gave him 28 yards. Look at the replay. I'm sure you have nothing to do tonight, but go home and look at that.
Obviously, they have nothing to do. They're here listening and watching us, which is a good thing.
That's
and we
right.
appreciate that. Okay.
So they got the first down. They went down and kicked the field goal to tie it. And then in overtime, for the first time in about 2 months, Favre threw a ball up, and Walker broke off a route. Instead of going deep, he broke it off short, and it was intercepted. They came down and kicked the winning field goal. And that was a Packer team that had the momentum. They could have maybe made some noise farther down the line with Favre playing at his absolute peak. Instead, it was so bad. So I felt so badly for him because he's just the bonehead that threw the interception again. And so the critics kind of came out and kind of blamed him when he carried that team with Amon Green in that offensive line. When Grady Jackson gets picked up in midseason, he becomes your best defensive player. You have a problem on defense. So that was a tough one. So thanks for bringing it up, Pip.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's my job,
yeah,
right?
I appreciate
okay.
that.
Obviously, there were others. Favre, the overtime throw against the Giants in the NFC Championship game in 2007. The big game against the Cardinals, 51-45. Remember when Aaron Rodgers was sacked and he fumbled and they went ahead and scored? I'll never forget Mike McCarthy just, all the way down the sidelines. Rodgers outplayed by Eli, 37-20. But the one I really there was San Francisco with Colin Kaepernick at the time going off as Jim Harbaugh was the coach for the 49ers. But we'll never forget the NFC champion. As bad as Philly was, I'm sure everybody would agree, NFC championship game in Seattle. The Packers are up 16-0.
The Packer defense played as well as they can possibly play in that game, just dominated. If you remember earlier that year, the Packers opened up in Seattle in week 1. It was a Monday night game, and Seattle absolutely thrashed them, 36-16, just dominated them in every respect. They didn't even put Jordy Nelson on the same field, on the same side as the top cornerbacks,
Richard Sherman,
that they had. So But during that year, what was interesting, that was the only year in the last 10 where the Packers had no injuries the entire year. It seems like every week nowadays the Packers have, here's their list of injuries, here's the Bears' list of injuries. I mean, it's ridiculous how many injuries the Packers have had in the last 5 years, but not in 14. They started the same 22 people at position that they from in week 1 that they did, except they demoted A.J. Hawk. A.J. Hawk kind of hit the wall, career wall, so they took him down. So the Packers were much better, and Seattle had a ton of injuries. They kind of came down, and they just dominated them until that special teams, that fake field goal.
Absolutely.
That was the thing.
Yeah.
And A.J. Hawk was
Wasn't
the
it
one.
John Ryan involved, the former Packers punter for Seattle?
John Ryan, yeah, threw the pass, and A.J. Hawk, unfortunately, went after him instead of staying back with the player. If they just had stayed back like they should have. So that was a horrible
But as
play.
bad as that was, you had the onside kick. Who will ever forget the onside kick?
Brendan Bostic won't.
Yeah, no, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And he got a lot of heat from a lot of people, I think, undeservedly. I mean, it really got crazy. It went way over the top.
Can I
But
just
that
say
play.
something, guys, real quick? I want to own up to something to everybody.
Okay, Mike,
We
producer Mike.
lost because of me.
Is that right? Why is
I
that?
said, we're going to the Super Bowl. And I totally jinxed the Packers. So
I think you probably
say
had
all
some.
you want.
I think.
It's my fault.
I think at the TV station we were making plans for the Super Bowl.
My wife called me. She's like, "You idiot!"
Yeah.
And sure enough, then the next few plays, next few.
Thanks a lot, Mike.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
I'm sorry.
Well, I think
I still
producer
feel shame.
producer Brent and Mike, they said, why don't we go about 20 to 25 minutes? I think we've been here about 8 hours, haven't we? But the audience has been fantastic. Give yourselves a Packers round of applause, and thank you. John, it's meant a lot to me to have my beautiful wife, Sally, and I've got in-laws here. It's fabulous. My stepson, Andrew, his fiancee, Winnie. It's great. And they even said outside, there was a little sign that said Tom Pipins. I said, I never got that much promotion in 33 years at Fox 6. So we appreciate it. But as we wrap it up, on behalf of John Dodge, Tom Pipins, a podcast, we call it the Tom Pipins Show with John Dodge. You can see that he's a key to it for sure. And you can find us at tompippins.com. You can find us here at Enders in Heartland. Pat Enders, again, thank you. You're a wonderful staff. You are the very, very best. So for now, we say so long, except that you can come out here with us on Super Bowl Sunday. We're going to do a little Packer trivia, right?
Packer Super Bowl trivia.
Yeah, why not? It'll be
I
appropriate.
can't think of any reason not to.
Oh, you betcha. And hopefully there'll be a Super Bowl real soon for the green and gold, but that's for another podcast. For JD, I'm Pip. Thanks, everybody. Have a great one. We appreciate your company.
Wow, thank you.
Thank you, always appreciate it. You're wonderful.
Thanks, guys. Very good.
How'd it feel?
A little bit longer than you wanted, but thank you, pal.
Good job.
What are we in game 2 now? What's New England? New England.